If you've been turning for any length of time at all, you've probably had some frustrating grain tear out on the inside of a bowl. It's just about impossible to fix torn fibers that are torn because they go so deep. Let me show you what causes tear out and some solutions for fixing it. Hi y'all, I'm Mike Peace and I'm here to share with you tips, tricks, and techniques to help you become a better wood turner. So if that's what you're interested in, click on the subscribe button and not miss any future videos. So let's analyze the problem and, more importantly, see how we can go about fixing it. Typically, torn grain occurs when fibers are plucked up by your gouge, as shown in this end grain project in this jewelry box I did a video on earlier. Tear out easily goes 1/8 of an inch deep and sometimes deeper, and the challenge is trying to sand it out. You generally can't. In this illustration of a bowl where the grain is going cross grain, that is perpendicular to the lathe bed, you'll be turning on the inside of a bowl, and you'll be doing fine on the side grain, which is very similar to cutting along a spindle. But as the bowl comes around, you're going to start hitting this end grain, and then you're going to start plucking up the fibers. To illustrate that further, if this was a pencil, you're trying to cut from the lead to the upper edge, and you're just grabbing all those fibers and plucking them out because they're not getting any type of support. And what's worse, then it starts smoothing out. You start cutting pure end grain, that slices fairly well. Then you start cutting side grain again, and that works pretty well until you come 180 degrees off of your first problem, marked here in red, and you start plucking out the fibers again. So if you'll notice on your bowls, when you're getting tear out, you're getting it in two spots opposite each other. So what are the three causes? The first one is your tool's not sharp. As I've often said, if it's almost sharp, it'll almost cut. So when you first start running into the problems with torn end grain, go sharpen your tool. It doesn't make any difference if you sharpened it a couple of minutes ago, go sharpen your tool. At 1,000 RPMs, a bowl of approximately this size, turning a 9-inch bowl going at 1,000 RPMs, is turning at a speed of about 25 miles per hour. That means in just a half a minute, the cutting edge of your bowl gouge is gone 1/4 of a mile. Think about dragging this along a piece of wood for 1/4 of a mile. Of course it's going to get dull. The second problem you have is bad tool technique. For example, let's look at this bowl again. We're going to change this bowl out and put a different one on there. The first problem we have is doing too much scraping with a bowl gouge because you're not riding the bevel. That's one possibility. The other one is you may be coming in from the wrong direction and plucking up fibers or encouraging a catch. The other one, this is a 5/8 inch bowl gouge. The other one is maybe you're using too large a gouge for that particular project, and cutting with something a little bit smaller, say a 1/2 inch bowl gouge, may give you a better cut, because the smaller amount of steel that's cutting, the less friction you're going to have. So and in some instances, even the 1/2 inch bowl gouge may wind up putting too much steel on it. The other one is of course, the angle of the gouge. There are times when an angle like this, which might be 50 degrees, works fine cutting down the rim of a bowl, but when you start coming along the bottom, you're not able to ride the bevel, in which case maybe your technique calls for a completely different angle, a much steeper one, where you can cut along the bottom with what we typically call a bottom of the bowl gouge. I've got a video on this if you want to get more information on that. But it has a much steeper grind so that you can ride the bevel, especially in deeper bowls. Another option could be what I often use as a finishing tool, and that's this small 3/8 inch bowl gouge with a very blunt angle here. It doesn't mean it's not sharp. It just means it's a fairly blunt angle. It's probably closer to 60 degrees rather than 40 degrees, and that enables you to slice and peel and come along, and with a very small amount of friction on a small edge, and it does very well on cleanup, and sometimes you can get rid of some of these problems. Let me take a pass on this, and let's see if we can see what a difference it might make. And that didn't seem to improve it any. The technique could call for very, very light cuts, and for this tear out that might go down an eighth or a quarter of an inch deep, stiffen the fibers and then take multiple passes of very light fibers across the across it. The other challenge is you may be using a scraper inappropriately or on the wrong piece of the wood. If you have a very soft, punky piece of wood like this, no kind of scraper that's either a conventional high-speed steel scraper or a flat carbide scraper is going to give you the appropriate surface. So that would be a bad tool technique to use a scraper. Works great if you've got hard wood and you've got little ripples or tool marks you're eliminating. But if you've got soft wood, it'll cause considerable amount of tear out. The one variation when I mentioned carbide is that if you had a tool such as this Hunter Viceroy tool with a #1 cutter, it is a cupped cutter. I'll see if I can't have a close-up here. And it slices, so it cuts completely different from your flat carbide. And in that case, that may be an excellent tool for you to get a finishing cut where you're getting some tear out. And this is a solution that I had when I was working on that jewelry box, where I was getting a tremendous amount of tear out on the end grain. Now the third problem is soft wood. It could be you're just using a soft wood that you're never going to get a good cut on. So I would say if you want to analyze the situation, if you're getting tear out, are you getting that tear out on a very hard wood, whether it's ash or even cherry or a hard maple or oak, fruit woods, Bradford pear, or are you getting it? If that's the case, chances are your problem is either unsharp tools or bad technique. But if it's happening on softer woods, whether it could be box elder, it could be poplar, it could be any type of spalted wood, including the example that we've got here, then that's a different issue. Now here's a solution for dealing with, attempting to deal with that. The solution is to try to stiffen the fibers, and you've got an array of tools you can do that with. The first one is if your tear out is not too bad, not too deep. But if you're not getting tear out this bad, maybe the solution is using some type of water spritzer, and sometimes simply stiffening the fibers a little bit with a spritz of water is going to be adequate for taking a pass, assuming that we have a sharp tool, as we've already discussed. Now, if you can't get a sharp pass on this, then the next issue would be escalated to something a little bit stronger. That could very well be some finish like walnut oil, or it could be something like this Howard Feed and Wax, which is a semi-liquid wax, or a paste wax, or it could be a sanding butter which I showed how to make in an earlier video. I'll have a link up here if you're interested in that, where it's made out of beeswax and mineral oil. And if the water didn't work or one of those other solutions, you might try rubbing this in and getting it deep into that soft, punky wood, and that may be enough to soften the fibers. And again, we're generally going to have the tear out on each end, so those are the areas that you need to concentrate on with your fiber stiffening process. If that doesn't work, another alternative is to use something like a sanding sealer, and that could be a lacquer sanding sealer, which like this Minwax, which I like because it dries so very fast, or it could be shellac, which might take a little bit longer. But those can all stiffen the fibers to enable you to get a clean pass. The solution that won't work with this is sanding. If you try to sand in this area, just in those spots where you're getting the tear out, you're going to get some large divots here on each side, which is going to just make for a very lumpy bowl. If you try to do it uniformly across while it's turning, it's going to abrade the softer surfaces, and again, you're just going to get a lumpy bowl. The coarser grit you'd need to cut this out is just going to continue to also tear out fibers. Some folks advocate using thin CA, and I would say if you've only got one or two small spots on a very smaller project, that might be a solution. I tend to avoid it because, number one, punky wood, the kind of wood that you're generally going to get your tear out on, is just going to suck this up in large quantities. You put large quantities, number one, it becomes a very expensive solution, but in addition, you're going to need some excellent ventilation, because the fumes from CA in large quantities are going to cause you a problem. If not now, later they're going to set you up for some type of respiratory problem in the future. So you want to avoid doing it with large quantities of CA. Another possibility is a commercial wood hardener such as Minwax, which I don't have here to show you. It comes in a round yellow metal can. But again, it's an expensive solution, but it basically turns the wood, it fills it up with a resin that hardens. But it takes 2 hours to harden, it's expensive, and similar to CA, you need good ventilation because the smell is not good for you and it can be dangerous in enclosed spaces. A less expensive solution might be using some carpenter's glue, such as this Tight Bond, and it's cut about 50-50. So you got half water and half Tight Bond, and you put that in, and it'll lower the viscosity of this, the water will, and it'll allow it to get in below the surface. Sometimes it doesn't need to go that deep. It's only got to go in maybe an eighth or a quarter of an inch, depending on how much tear out you've got. So if solutions number one and number two doesn't work, and you've got soft, punky wood where you just can't seem to deal with the tear out, the option is always use John Jordan's advice. Life is too short for turning crappy wood. Don't feel like it's you versus the wood and you have to win and you can't let it beat you into submission. Don't waste your time with a piece of wood where you're not having fun. You're going to have a tremendous tear out. You're going to have a hard time fixing it. You may succeed in making a bowl, but it's not going to have a good surface. It's not something that you're going to be proud of. Wood grows on trees. Get you another better bowl blank. If it's your own wood, monitor it a little more closely as it's sitting outside or inside green waiting to turn to make sure you don't let it go past its best if used by day. Hope these tips have been useful for you. You stay safe and come on back here.